Welcome to the Change My View podcast. I'm Michael Hatch here with Cal Turnbull. Thank you for listening, and we're just going to get right into today's first post. This post is on. It's about Facebook. It's posted by username. We'll just turn right here to the poster themselves, who's here to join us. Quentin, thank you for joining. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Great. And so your post got 709 upvotes. So a lot of interesting discussion came out of this one. So before we get into the post, would you mind, and there'll be a couple of things like this, but reading just in your own voice the title of the post.
Yeah. So the title is Change My View. Given the recent news, there is no quality of Facebook that is redeeming enough to justify keeping your profile.
Great. And then now what was going on for you in your world? Now I see you posted here about taking the ethics exam and all that, but we would like to ask, generally what was going on in your life that led to you kind of to the point where you wanted to post on Change My View, that you got bubbled up enough that you really wanted to get some input on it.
Yeah, so I think it's been something that's in one way brewing for a number of months. Just a general feeling about social media profiles and sort of the things that we give up in ourselves, be it privacy or even just something as simple as our own free time, using that. And then I think it was either that day or the day before was when there was a lot of news coming out about what exactly the data that Facebook possesses is being used for, and how it sort of might be used to sway elections, not illegally or anything, but maybe improperly, more as an issue of ethics. And so to that, and then of course there's the caveat that yes, all of this personal information is given up willingly by the users, but I don't think people really understand the depth to which all of that metadata and all the mass personal profile information is used in ways that affect society and the sort of our social systems. So I think that I was just to a point where I'd personally struggled with the systems or with the social networks for a while, and then once that came out, I was willing to start a discussion about it, and it took off. So I was grateful for that.
So your hesitation then, I guess, would it be fair to say, is less about individual instances of inconvenience to you, but rather your moral and ethical concerns on a global national scale of and not wanting to be a part of something that you feel has larger detrimental effects.
Yeah, I would say that's fair.
Cool. Okay. Now, so the next thing we'll try to do, especially if it's a post that's relatively brief like yours is would you mind just reading the text of your post and read the title one more time for us, and then the text of the post in your own voice, just so we can associate you with that comment, and we may go through a couple of comments later.
Yeah, of course.
Great.
So Change My View. Given the recent news, there's no quality of Facebook that's redeeming enough to justify keeping your profile. Studies proving detriments to mental health, check. Data mining, check. Massive invasions of privacy, check. Unwillingness to combat spread of misinformation, check. And undermining elections all over the globe, check. Given everything we now know about Facebook and its internal and external effects on us as humans and as a society, there is simply no justification for keeping your profile anymore. The convenience of having groups, the ability to share photos or updates, the so-called platform for open debate, all of the good together does not come close to outweighing the bad. We now know enough about its detrimental effects upon our mental health and the health of our institutions to the point that it is a moral imperative that the platform be abandoned. I have to take the NPRE, which is the ethics exam for future attorneys, on Saturday, so I'm busy preparing for that. However, once that's over, I'm going to be downloading any pictures and videos on my profile I don't want to lose and axing my account. Convince me that the profile is worth keeping, and more importantly, convince me that the larger scale societal benefits are worth keeping Facebook around.
Okay, great, thank you. Now I'm looking at these top comments here, right? And it looks as though the very top comment was deleted. Though you have a response to it, do you recall what that top comment was?
Well, based on based on now, the top comment that I see, let me refresh because maybe that's changed, because the top comment that I see has not been deleted. Oh yeah, I see what you're talking about now. It looks like he was discussing the coordination problem, which, as I understood it, and which was something that a lot of people brought up, whether or not they knew to call it by that name. The coordination problem is basically what most people pointed to as all the conveniences of Facebook that make it worth keeping, and that is getting together large groups of people and organizing events, making plans or changes of plans in an instantaneous fashion, and being able to alert everyone to that immediately. And it just solves a lot of the inconveniences of really just social lives and professional lives and things like that.
Gotcha. So the ability to do some active, real-time, hyperspeed democracy in action stuff is an upside, I guess. And
yeah,
and the universality of Facebook, it's almost like a utility, you know. So I guess what they were saying is that though there are bad parts, it's really like a neutral actor. It's not.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people's problem with my view, there were a couple things. And first was that all of the information that they have that may or may not be used in a way that we would disagree with is given up willingly. So it's not like, you know, they're hacking into your own personal computer and stealing information and data about you, as much as it is that, you know, we put our profiles and we like things and we associate with certain people and certain companies and certain activities, and so then they use that data, and we all give that up willingly.
Yeah.
And then the other issue is, well, there's the problem of the fact that it is so ingrained, and that's I think I gave one delta out, and not because it necessarily completely changed my view, but because the poster who talked about that changed the way I was thinking about it. He added a sort of a temporal bit into the equation, which was that, yes, that this is bad, and yes, it probably should be abandoned in lieu of something better, but until something better comes along, this is all we have. And in order to solve this coordination problem that has been a problem for so long, this is a sacrifice that maybe not we as a society, but that on an individual basis all across the board, people seem to be willing to give up.
So everyone would have to like move it once somehow. And
yeah,
there's no real, you know, MySpace isn't going to really step up to fill that.
Yeah. Or Zynga, I think, that has the best chance after MySpace. Yeah.
I was thinking maybe LinkedIn might do it, but no, it's super professional. You know?
Yeah.
No. So what, in terms of your online activity, if you were to make a pie chart of your social media interaction with the world, what are your top 3 platforms? What percentage of your social media type time or does Facebook take up?
These days, it's a very small slice of the pie. And I would say that's been the case for the recent, I don't know, 4 months or so. Now, right after the presidential election, that would have been a very different answer. Because I was, and that's something else that's unhealthy. A lot of people argue that it's good for open discourse, but that's a different discussion. But these days, I would say, I mean, Reddit is probably the by a large margin, the largest chunk of that pie. And then it would probably be followed by, I don't know, maybe just scrolling through Instagram. And then beyond that, not much. It would probably be
Twitter, no Snap or anything, or
no. I mean, I use those, but not much. I mean, maybe Snap would be next. But.
What about your friends, like friends and family? Is that all still mostly Facebook?
Yeah. So, well,
or just text.
So friends, people who are closer to my own age, I would say it's more based on what I know. They use more of Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat, and then there's some Facebook in there as well. But family is definitely, especially in the older generation, my parents' generation, grandparents, and things like that. It is Facebook.
Yeah. So I'm someone who will like to be keeping my Facebook. I'm sort of, I guess, I'm complicit, or I guess by staying with it, but at the same
Yeah.
time, there is that it is an important. I mean, to me, it's a small percentage of my social media pie now too. I check in, half of my posts are just like, occasional things with family or,
Yep.
I don't really do a lot of opinion stuff or anything there anymore. Like I once did, but what are, like, if you could tie me to the complicity, like what case would you make to really make me feel bad? Why should I leave?
No, and I don't. To be clear, I don't want to do that. I don't want anyone to feel bad, and I think there were some people who took it that way. But I think that even if you aren't using it to the degree that it might be problematic, or it might be affecting your own mental health, or you're willingly giving up tons and tons of information, and then you find out that's being used, and you're like, I don't care. Even for people who use it like you, and frankly like me, it's the complicity I would say is that, well, you're another profile. So, and while it's you're not paying for that, so you're not giving Facebook any money directly, you are another profile, so you're a number on that stack of profiles, which I'm sure is some metric that they use in order to draw advertisers. It makes them obviously attractive to advertisers because they have such a large user base. And just staying on, I think, would make it allows that system and the things that they're using the data for to perpetuate. So even though you might not personally be giving up data, or if you are, and if you're not somebody who's targeted by certain ads and who's sort of gone after with news articles that aren't real, and your mind isn't swayed by that, there still could be things that you're contributing in sort of an ancillary way that might be hurting other people, and obviously not directly, but indirectly in a way, and it would be a very minor way. But
yeah, well, there were, what was it, 270,000 or something people that were part of that Cambridge Analytica breach, right? But by multiplication, that ended up being like 50 million people because it included all their friends, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just to kind of update our audience a little on the technical parts of this, would it be accurate to say that this data was scrapable by anyone if their setting was set to fully public, but that the violation part, I guess, would be getting info of people's friends and their profiles who otherwise would only share their info just with their friends rather than publicly? Is that kind of the worst breach of here that we're talking about? Like, Cambridge gets to see, like you're seeing through your eyes, to get their info, which is otherwise only available to you because you're their friend?
Yeah, so that would be another factor. And to be totally honest, I'm not as familiar with all of the technicalities as far as like what is accessible through public profiles, going through those as a conduit to reach private profiles. So I'm not sure what all can be ascertained from that. But certainly if there was some degree of that, I mean, that would be a huge violation of privacy, in my opinion, especially because Facebook does advertise their privacy settings as being so concrete and so effective.
Yeah.
And then they're essentially selling that or giving it away or whatever it is.
Gotcha. And so one of the things that comes up a lot here, more recently even, is some of these efforts people are making to improve the debate and conversation and things. And so, like, Change My View, I think, is an example of a place that succeeded in creating a certain environment for that. We spoke to someone in the last podcast who, for their graduate project, they are creating essentially a repository of the good versions of arguments on both sides or the many sides of different issues. The What Is Thinking project with that Alex, shoot, I'm forgetting his last name now. But it's last week's episode if anyone wants to look it up. Like, if Facebook were to somehow implement, I don't know, a truthiness ranking system from news sources, or an autocorrect for weasel words like Wikipedia doesn't let you do in people's posts, like would you be open to staying in Facebook if they had some kind of, I almost want to say quasi-draconian like controls to prevent this trolling and all that? Or would you, do you want it just a whole someone else's new platform to do it, or?
Yeah. So well, first of all, one person had brought this up in the comments, that saying that it needs to be regulated, and presumably by the government, and I strongly disagree with that. They tried to compare it to alcohol and firearms, and saying like these are all social problems, and so the government solution was to regulate it, and it doesn't fix it, but it helps. But none of those issues involve the First Amendment, and so that's totally out, in my opinion. I would never advocate for that. As far as what Facebook could do on its own, I think that, yes, I would never be opposed to a good idea. And if that could be done well and be done properly, then yes, I think that would benefit the platform greatly. However, I think that that's also putting a lot of power into very few hands. And there's sort of this idea that if you're going to create this platform and make it available to everyone, it seems a little disingenuous to run it one way for, what, 10 years now? Over 10 years? 15? I don't know how long it's been around. And then to implement that, and I just don't think that it would be done right. I think that because it would be done by humans, it's necessarily fallible, and so there's going to be
the worst, aren't they?
biases that come in. Yeah, no, it's true. There are going to be biases that come into play, even with the best intentions. So you're going to get something that is suppressing a lot of viewpoints under the guise of them being harmful or damaging, when in reality they're just implicit biases that these moderators, you would call them, would be just suppressing views because they don't really like them, and I don't think that would help anyone.
Gotcha. Hey, Cal, could I ask a favor real quick? I've been trying to find the comment with where he gave the delta. Any chance you might be able to shoot me the direct link for that?
Yeah, I'll shoot the link to you. I was just going to ask as well.
Go ahead.
It seems quite a few of the responses you got kind of used the justification of it, Facebook being linked to other sites, so Spotify and maybe some other apps. And I can see here that wasn't really a satisfying answer to you. Could you talk a bit more about that, perhaps?
Yeah, I think that is certainly something that Facebook has sort of got going for it. It's cornered that market on convenience, joining other websites or logging into other websites. Because why would you create a new password and get emails when you could just click the little blue F and get it done in an instant? However, I think that the argument against that is simply that at the end of the day, that's just a huge convenience. And that really in no way answered the question that was in my original post, which was more looking for a sort of innate value of the platform that might counteract all of these ethically wrong or at least ethically questionable things that the platform is doing, and both doing and fostering.
Yeah, it did seem that maybe that was kind of clutching at straws a little bit. But it's interesting nonetheless, the idea that sometimes, just out of pure convenience, that people will try their best to overlook the downsides. Michael, I sent you a link to the Delta comment there.
Great. Yeah, and I just realized the second I said that the links are at the top by DeltaBot, and I all I had to do was click that link. Okay, so I'm looking at the response here from Svan Katwick, and so there is a delta here. So what I thought might be good is if I just read their comment, so it's a different voice than yours, and then if you wouldn't mind reading yours, and we could talk a little bit about the delta a little more. I know
sure.
Just so our audience can hear the comment. So, all right, so this is the comment that earned your delta. I think a lot, and this is by Svan Katwick. Here goes. I think a lot of us commenting agree with you that Facebook isn't good and we don't want it. So I can't tell you that there are personal and societal benefits of keeping Facebook. But I think there's a strong argument that I bet you already agree with, that a social network in general services certain social goods. It wouldn't be the case that so many use social networks that they weren't gaining utility from it, despite the costs. And if you don't agree that social networks can provide social good that can be expressed in an individual's utility, then the rest of this post can't convince you, and I thank you for your time. Assuming that generally a social network offers utility to individuals, then your argument that it is no longer justifiable, quote unquote, is essentially saying that associated costs of Facebook are now clearly outweigh the social and personal gains. On this point, I agree. The costs outweigh the gains. However, the fact that so many of us are stuck keeping our profiles indicates a coordination problem that no alternative social network has yet to provide a sufficiently substitutable alternative to convince us all to switch. I know you believe that a coordination problem isn't sufficient justification, quote unquote, but on this point, I disagree entirely. If you agree that a coordination problem is present, then its very existence is sufficient justification for why people haven't switched. That is the very definition of why it is a problem. I totally understand how that can feel insufficiently and stupidly unfair, but that is the very nature of this kind of problem. Take heart in knowing that there will be a gradual but suddenly massive switch away from Facebook as more and more agents seek out replacements. If your OP was saying that it is our responsibility to be those trailblazers and seek out and support alternative social network platforms to hasten the destruction of Facebook, I would probably agree with you. And that's the end of the comment there.
Yeah. So first, I quoted a portion of what he'd said, and just to point to that, I'll read through it real quick. So I quoted him saying, "However, the fact that so many of us are stuck keeping our profiles indicates a coordination problem that no alternative social network has yet to provide a sufficiently substitutable alternative to convince us all to switch. I know you believe that a coordination problem is not a sufficient justification, but on this point, I disagree entirely. If you agree that a coordination problem is present, then its very existence is sufficient justification for why people haven't switched. That's the very definition of why it is a problem." And I replied to that, "You're not the first person to point out the coordination problem, as you know. And you also recognize that I don't agree that the good is outweighed by the bad any longer. We've recently reached a tipping point. However, you get this delta because the way you frame the issue is, to me, worth pause. So even though the bad may still outweigh the good, we as a society might be willing to endure that temporarily. Correct me if I'm wrong, but your thesis is essentially, this is a problem that has reached a point of no return on this platform, and it must be addressed. However, it's a problem worth enduring in the short term until we can solve the separate and equally great coordination problem by some method that's less harmful than Facebook. And while I'm not sure that I'm 100% on board with that in its entirety, it's the first response that has presented that idea. That is, adding in the temporal factor as worth consideration. And that was something that I had not considered."
And I'll just add, it's because it's short enough, I'll add their response to you, and that kind of, I think, puts a button on that. But what they wrote back to you is, "I think your description of my thesis is fair, though I too am not 100% on board with it either. Basically, I'm trying to say that the way out of the coordination problem like this is for a new option to be made available that changes the existing equilibrium. I think all the points you've made about the cost of Facebook could be true for other social platforms, and the platform that successfully avoids them while providing an acceptable alternative to Facebook services will be the option that will have everyone flood away from Facebook. Until then, there won't be a sufficiently critical mass moving off Facebook to overcome the current trap of using it for certain small features so many people have commented on. Thanks for the delta and have a great day." So what I'm wondering, when you said, as far as the temporal thing and to give you pause, do you mean literally this might delay the time before you cancel your Facebook, or just pause kind of in the moment of the thread itself?
No, it just gave me a pause to think about that in the thread, not necessarily to delay getting rid of the profile. Yeah, and so I think I probably could have phrased it better, but by temporal, what I meant was that I had only considered it in like, okay, let's look at all of the bad things that Facebook has created and that really we as people do through it, and then look at all of these benefits that people are coming at me with. The coordination problem, and then all of the other conveniences that were mentioned throughout the thread, and look at those in this one instance and compare them and weigh them, and then depending on which side you come out on, make your decision. But what I hadn't considered was adding, looking at it over time and looking at it whether or not we're willing to endure those bad things in the reasonably foreseeable future. Because these benefits really are such good benefits when used properly.
Yeah, so it could be analogous to say, the United States for the first 60 years, 70 years when it still had slavery. It's like, well, hang on, we'll eventually have that civil war and get this worked out, or I mean, is it? And it's not that bad, but is there an element of this though that Facebook is what we are? Like, Bezos has this ethos that he wanted to really tailor Amazon to what people want. Exactly what they want, and do a better job at it than anyone. Is Facebook merely just giving us what we want? Is it? Can they be blamed for giving the humans the thing that they're going to ask for? I mean.
Yeah, no, you're correct on that. There's absolutely,
like we want our bubbles.
Yeah, there's no doubt that Facebook by itself, of course, can't do any harm. If it just sat online and nobody used it, or nobody used it improperly, it couldn't do anything. And so it is certainly our own behavior on the platform that creates the issue, and also our own, the reliance that people have built on it. I think that the guy who got the Delta mentioned, like everyone's going to agree with a lot of these problems, but look at how everyone keeps their profile. So there's obviously something that's drawing them to it. And so, yeah, it is a problem of our own making. But I wouldn't necessarily say that just because it's giving us what we want and something that people enjoy, that means that it should be there. I think that it's certainly something that's hard to argue against, but I do think that it's a weak argument, because it's just sort of like child rearing. Like, you don't give your kid all of the things that they want that makes them happy, because ultimately, and then an outside observer would agree that it's not good for them. I get upset every time that I'm at a restaurant or something and I look over and there's a parent whose kid's kind of acting up, and so what do? They just hand them an iPad or a cell phone or whatever, and they're like, okay, just like shut up and look at that screen. And it's like, well, that's going to solve the problem in the short term, and that's going to make that kid happy, but that's not what's good, and you shouldn't be doing that. And the kid's not going to realize it for himself.
Yeah.
So you would hope that the parent does. And so that's sort of the analogy that first comes to mind.
Right on. Well, we've got a couple of other guests joining us, and we'll definitely want to hear a little bit of your input on what they'll be talking about. But before we wrap up your thing, I want to invite them to see if they have anything to add to the Facebook discussion. So if either of our other guests want to chime in, please, you are more than welcome. And when you do, just state your name and let us know a little bit before you start.
Hi, since Tristan doesn't seem to be unmuting, I'll go ahead and start. I'm Saad.
Great, welcome.
I did read your post a few days ago 5 days ago, when you posted it, and I was like, yeah, that's something I can generally agree with. A lot of the problems in social media right now, I think, are stemming from Facebook. And I don't think it's just the whole Cambridge Analytica, data mining, all that stuff. I think out of every social media platform that we use, Facebook is kind of the biggest enabler of being in your own bubble.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably one of the biggest problems that I saw with it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I had mentioned that somewhere, that my biggest problem, and because people were like, well, these problems exist on all of these other platforms as well, so why are you just going after Facebook? And to me, it's because that any problem, if you have a Venn diagram and you have all of the social media platforms, they're going to have overlaps at certain points. And then around all of those, you're going to have Facebook. So it's got, it has everything. It has the news, fake news. I hate to use that. But it enables and encourages sort of mindless, faceless, disrespectful debate. And there's also the sort of mental, all of the mental detriments to your own personal mental health that comes with a lot of social media and other problems. And I agree that the bubble problem is a big one as well, because there is no other platform that's used for sharing, news and common interests and things like that in the same way that Facebook does.
Yeah. Also, you guys were talking about the coordination thing, where it's easy to sign into other things. Mm-hmm. There is one more platform that lets you do that. Unfortunately, that platform is called Google+.
Yeah. Yeah.
We all rooted for Google+.
Yeah. It's kicking it while it's down.
Yeah.
Never took off.
Yeah, even in the decimals, I guess it's technically plus still, but all right, cool. Well, is there any other, we had one other guest here who I hadn't gotten the full input yet of how they want to be addressed yet, so I don't want to say their name per se unless I get the okay. But did you want to add anything in before we switch topics? Okay, then we'll move on then. So any final thoughts, Quentin, before we go to the next topic and our other two guests?
My final thoughts would just be that this was not as much a call to action as it was just something that I've been thinking about personally, and that I wanted to discuss and explore my own ideas. So I don't want anyone to leave this thinking that that guy, that asshole, thinks that he's telling me what I should do with my profile, and he's going to think that I'm contributing to the problem, and I'm don't care about society if I don't. And that's not at all the case. I think that it can be used responsibly. There are certainly a lot of benefits that are listed throughout the post, and so I would just encourage others to, if not delete it, then at least sit and think about why they actually use it, and have an honest internal discussion as to whether all of the internal and external negative side effects are worth those benefits that they discover. So that would be it. And also thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, no, thank you for being a model OP, and you gave a delta and everything, and yeah, it looks like that was a good discussion. So for anyone else who wants to read more about that topic, obviously the post will be in the show notes and on Change My View. And yeah, so just hang tight then, and we'll move to our next two guests, which are an OP and a commenter on a different post, also from this week. So thanks very much, and let's introduce our next OP. It's Saad, right?
Yeah.
Great. And Saad, do you want to tell us anything about yourself, or just you can stay completely anonymous? What do you anything you want to say before we get into it?
I mean, I guess for initial context, I'm a high school student. I'm 16, so it's only been a few years since I got into the political space, and I'm still learning. So take my opinion with a grain of salt.
Right on. No, I mean that's a great way to go into approaching adulthood, is having that open mind and being like, hey, I still got a lot to learn, because I'm 37 and I still got a lot to learn too. So let's I'm gonna open up your post here then, and if you could, do you have the post open in front of you?
Yeah, I got it.
Great. So the way we like to start this is, if you wouldn't mind, just please reading just the title of your post in your own voice there, and go for it.
Okay. Change my view, even though America's political makeup is 50-50, that was a mistake on my part. Republicans have a large majority in state positions and in Congress, and it's not just because of gerrymandering.
Great. And so was there anything going on with you personally when you, what was the context that led you to say, hey, I really want to write a post about this? Was it something you read in the news? Do you have a debate with someone at school, or?
It's kind of a long story, yeah.
Oh,
So it kind of started Monday morning when I woke up and watched the latest episode of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. Favorite show on TV.
Right.
Did you guys see that episode? Or do you guys watch it?
I occasionally see the YouTube of his one-man monologue, but I don't watch it on time or anything.
Yeah. So basically, the main story of this weekend was about Mike Pence, and he ended it by talking about a book that his daughter was coming out with about his bunny.
Oh yeah.
And it was like, yeah, okay.
So,
yeah, so that's basically where it started. It started with him taking Mike Pence's bunny and making him gay, and selling millions of books. Both books. He raised more attention to both books, so basically everything was better because of it, because both books donated to pretty good charities. So it kind of got me thinking that, are you guys familiar with the, I guess it's the alignment chart?
is that sort of the four quadrants of where your political where you tend
No,
to fall.
this isn't political. It's like lawful good, neutral good, chaotic
Oh,
good.
Dungeons and Dragons character.
Yes,
Yeah,
that.
sure. Everyone else
So-
here familiar with that roughly? Or? Okay, we'll just keep moving. Yeah.
Yes, I'm looking at it now.
Yeah, it got me thinking that a lot of the stuff John Oliver does is in the chaotic segment of that, and he usually brings about a lot of change because of it, and why that was. And it also got me thinking about, I live in the South, so mostly what I see are conservatives, and so what I noticed with a lot of the people that I met was that a lot of them would just vote. They just vote. Like, it wouldn't really matter what they were voting for. They just vote for, the candidate that was up for election every time. And so that was kind of the theme of my entire post. It was liberals vote when they're energized, and Republicans vote whenever, which is why it seemed more like liberals tended to be on the chaotic side because something was happening and they went to vote. I'm trying to explain this. So that's kind of what got it started, and then it went into other things. So I want to talk about specifically one thread that deviated from my main point, which was
Well, if you, Saad, if you wouldn't mind, just before we get into the comments themselves, now that we've got a little context from you, I just want to, if you wouldn't mind reading the text of your whole post in your own words, please.
that would
And then
probably
just title again as well.
Okay, so yes, gerrymandering is a large facet as to why Republicans continue to stay in power since 2010, after they kind of overtook the main legislative portion of the government. And I said that it was sort of a simple reason. On average, liberals tend to vote when a candidate energizes them, while conservatives will on average vote for the party nominee whenever election season comes along. So, which is why when you saw during Bernie Sanders' campaign, he didn't win, but he got more people on average to come out and vote that wouldn't have voted initially, because he had an energizing message. And Trump sort of did the same thing. And Clinton fell short of that during the general election, which is why even with good polling, she didn't win the popular vote, which with as much of a majority as they showed, because she didn't have an energizing, unifying message.
Okay, and this is a TLDR at the end, if you wouldn't mind, just
Yeah.
written.
TLDR, what allowed Republicans to get into power so quickly and in such huge numbers. Liberals vote when they find an energizing message. Conservatives vote when election season comes, on average. I'm not trying to make blanket statements.
Of course, yeah, and cool, and then that's great. You've got a nice, brief summary here, and you didn't have to go super long-winded, which sometimes that can be a sign of someone just soapboxing when it's super long. So going into this, then, overall, how do you feel the discussion went?
I think the discussion went good. I think one of the better parts of it was a deviation that we had in one comment section. Someone said the reason U.S. government tends to be conservative is because rural areas tend to be conservative, and the rural areas, by design of the founders, have disproportionate force to counterweight the cities, which makes sense. However, the problem that I saw with that is that Democrats are much more likely to, in the 2018 midterms, flip the Senate than flip the House of Representatives, which doesn't really make sense. Like, there's a higher proportion of Republicans to Democrats in the House of Representatives than there are in the Senate, which kind of is the opposite of how it's supposed to be, right? The representative is supposed to be a more accurate representation of, if you just took the entire country and put them into one district, this is how it would be. And then the Senate is 2 from every state, which is to counter, big cities.
Gotcha. And then, so the reply to that, so if you would, okay, so your comment here that starts with, I think that, would you mind just reading that real quick? And then I'll read the short reply. So it's a different voice.
I'm trying to figure out which one you're talking about.
Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? I think I might have skipped to the wrong place here where the delta is. My mistake. So we'll just go back to what you were talking about. When you were, a part of your claim, like a basic part of your claim is just a demographic one. Like, we can check the numbers. So did you end up doing that and just seeing where the numbers lie?
I didn't do it when I was making this post. It was more of like previous research I had done
Oh, gotcha.
on this kind of stuff. obviously I made an incorrect statement saying it's 50-50. That's obviously incorrect. It's not 50-50. There's a center area. Independents also exist, apparently.
Yeah, just don't hear as much from them.
Yeah. But I mean, still, the point sort of still stands that there is a relatively equal amount of liberals and conservatives in the country, and yet the government doesn't represent that, at least in the House of Representatives, as much as it should.
Gotcha. And what is your sense among people your age, how this breaks down?
I think among people my age, all of them now are more energized lenient than just vote lenient, even among conservatives that I know, because most of my friends are, since I live in Tennessee. But I've kind of just generally seen that they care more about the message that they're getting than I'm just voting for a Democrat or a Republican.
Okay, so they're more informed than you might think previous generations might have been at your age.
Right.
Perhaps something to do with more access to information, internet, all that.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And there's been a lot of heat right now in the news as far as youth activity in politics.
Right.
And are you seeing a lot of that among your friends and everything as well, or is that more localized to Florida or where all that's going down, do you think?
Oh no, definitely. It's kind of become part of all of us. All of us are a little bit more politically active than I think previous generations have been, which is a really good thing. Although when Rick Santorum says that we should be learning CPR instead, it kind of makes me mad, but whatever.
Right. Okay. Well, we have one of the commenters here, and I'd like to bring them in. Are you with us?
Yep.
And how would you like us to refer to you?
Tristan.
Great. Okay. So thanks for joining us, Tristan. And Tristan, now I want to bring up your comment here, and I just want to check with you what your username was.
Oh yeah, it's PM me your definition.
Okay. Cool. So, wow, that sounds familiar for some reason. Okay. So I don't have it right in front of me, but would you mind telling me just what your comment was, and we'll go from there?
Okay. Mine, I was talking about basically voter turnout as opposed to gerrymandering or specific politics. And that's actually something I love, the Change My View subreddit. And one of the things I like most about it is that you don't just have to kind of have the discussion OP wants to have. Like you can have discussions with other commenters, and you can change their mind, or they can change your mind, or you can talk about different points of it. And something that caught my eye about this was kind of the assumption that America is split and we all vote, and it's either because one side's more energized than the other, or that gerrymandering. Those are like, it's
well, actually,
factors.
Can I pause you right there? I just found it. It just came up. So what I was hoping you might do is if I could read the post that leads into this 3-part thread, and then if Saad, if you would read your comment, and then we can get to you, and you can read yours, and we'll just give a little taste of what's happening in the thread in audio here. Does that work?
That's good.
Cool. Okay, so I'm just going to read this one of the higher comments here by Rufus_Reddit, and they say as follows: the U.S. political makeup is not 50-50. For example, if you look at party affiliation, it's around 30-40-30, like Saad was saying earlier, and there's a link to Gallup poll. Follow that says this idea that the country can be nicely divided into liberals and conservatives is not really accurate. Even in these times of polarization, it's mostly a mushy middle. And then quote Saad, what allowed Republicans to get into power so quickly is in such huge numbers. He continues to say, or she, please elaborate on what so quickly, quote unquote, and quote, such huge numbers, unquote, means. Do you think that recent changes are somehow bigger or faster than the ones that happened in, say, 1994 or 1980, which leads to a response by Saad?
Yeah, I said, okay, I get what you mean. I guess that is to say that Republicans and Democrats and liberals and conservatives are in relatively similar numbers, but most people are somewhere in the middle based on their opinions. And to your second point, I can't really say when exactly it happened, but I thought that the Republican wave in Congress during the 2018 midterms seems like a good example, because we elected a Democratic president. Things seem to be leaning to the left, and then Republicans kind of took over Congress in 2010.
Yeah. And just a little context for those listening, and I think this is right. Is 2010 being also a census year?
Yeah.
Republicans being in power, that helped them gerrymandering wise. So without getting into too much of the weeds on that, but yeah. So PM me your definition, Tristan, if you wouldn't mind going into your response there.
Okay, yeah. So I said, if we compare the Republican Party today to what they were running on 30 to 50 years ago, there's been a huge change, and that change has followed their changing voting demographic. But the demographic they're following is even more important than the conservative, moderate, or liberal breakdown, and it's the voter-non-voter split. The highest turnout is every 4 years for a presidential election, and on those years, we barely get to 50% of registered voters. So this is actually wrong, but whatever. As recently in '96, we didn't even get to 50%, and we have to go back to the '60s to ever crack 60%. So even in the highest turnout years, around 50% of eligible voters don't bother to vote, and in non-presidential years, where a lot of state and local elections are decided, the turnout is much worse. The 2014 turnout was 36%, or to put it another way, most people don't vote in most elections. But what we do see is that older and wealthier people tend to vote more often. There's a lot of theories why, but these demographics have historically skewed towards Republican voters. Or to look at it a different way, the Republican Party is moving its platform towards issues that are important to these voting blocs. If we look at support for an issue like universal health care, it gets a majority of support across all voters. And even a specific question like support for Roe v. Wade sees strong support among Democratic voters, and even majority support among Republican voters. So why do so many Republican candidates run against an issue like that? It's because they know that people who are actually going to vote come out and vote against it, which is actually kind of similar to how gerrymandering works. Instead of having a platform and going out and convincing people to vote for it, it's a lot easier to tailor your platform to a few special interest groups that are actually to turn out to vote, and it's even easier if you draw the districts to favor those particular voters.
Great, thank you. So nice, long, but organized post there in response. And Saad, what was your initial reaction to seeing that?
Yeah, I agreed with a lot of what it said, that the Republican Party is kind of tailoring it to older voters who are, in general, more likely to come out and vote more, so that even younger conservatives aren't being as representative in the Conservative Party. So it is easier to tailor what you say to people. Basically, their logic is, I'm going to do whatever I'm going to vote, however, is going to get me into power. I'm going to support the policies that will get me into power the easiest, whereas in general with liberal candidates, you more see them just coming out in support of things that they support.
Oh, so you think it's more likely that a Republican candidate would be swayed by the desires of their constituents than a Democrat?
Not necessarily, but recently, yeah.
Gotcha. Is that sort of just like a hunch? It just feels like it's going that way, or was that a
observation? Yeah, hunch observation.
Okay. Yeah, it's hard to number crunch everything at all times. So totally. Yeah, I can't say one more than another. But one thing I noticed that was a through line, both in this post and the other one, is the interesting. Well, focusing more just on yours, was a book that actually got brought up last week about the differences between the psychological differences between the two parties in terms of the big five psychological factors. And I am now completely blanking on the author's name. I want to say Jonathan Spates, but it's not him. It is, here it is. Okay. Nope. Didn't add it. Okay. So anyways, do you think that these, there are personality differences and tendencies between the parties that are reflected in the behavior by the representatives, or like that 50-50 split? You could go to a lot of countries in the world and you still see conservative and liberal. And you were talking about the chaos versus order and the that D&D personality chart. In some sense, the conservative side would be slowing things down, putting on the brakes, and the progressive side or more liberal side would be moving things forward as fast as possible. And so there's a bit of tension, I guess, between the two.
Yeah.
Do you think that's kind of how things ought to work, or is it is this the ordinary operation of a republic, or is there something more askew here? You know?
Yeah, I did want to elaborate on the the D&D alignment chart thing a little bit, in that I wanted to use a couple of examples in how that worked, and I think it can kind of answer your question. So I believe, was it in North Carolina that there was a law passed that made it legal for businesses to discriminate based on orientation? Was it North Carolina?
I think there's been a couple of different like wedding cake type cases.
Yeah, right. So basically, you're using law to make it legal to do something that is basically illegal, right? Discriminate against people based on some social status of theirs. Or I believe it was when the Republicans took power in 2010, John McCain said, our entire purpose for the next 6 years is to block everything Obama does as best we can. So like that's kind of them leaning more towards the lawful side, and then liberals leaning more towards the chaotic side to combat that.
Right.
I don't think that's a good way we should be going about it.
So you think, you know, like you talked about these voices in the middle here, the mushy middle, like maybe we need a little more noise from there to sort of have ideas that could bridge both sides. It seems to incorporate the best of each or something like that.
Yeah. And back to Tristan's point, I think 90% of voters support universal background checks on firearms, which nothing gets 90% support in this country. And yet the majority of Republican politicians are trying not to do that. So it is them trying to pander to a group that they think might vote more.
Yeah.
Well, I think talking about issues like that, where you see big support for issues that don't really line up with clear party lines, like you have Republicans supporting something that's not in the Republican Party platform or something.
Yeah.
I think it really goes against this idea of easily splitting up the country into like, oh, this side's liberal, this side's Republican, and there's like the independents in the middle. I mean, just in my experience, everybody I know who's registered independent or unregistered votes the same way every election. Like we like to call it like a mushy middle, but I think there's a pretty clear demarcation amongst views, at least on individual issues, and that I don't feel like it's so much that politicians are kind of like there's this big pool of voters and you position yourself amongst them where you think you'll get the most votes. It's more that you kind of focus on these issues of turnout and stuff, and especially midterm elections, local elections. I mean, almost no one votes on anything except for presidential elections. And when you see Republicans getting huge numbers in like governor's races and state senates and like the House of Representatives, a lot of that is elections that happen on non-presidential years. And it's basically just a different part of the country is voting than is voting every 4 years. And I mean, I think that's kind of the underlying cause of these kind of issues we see. And I don't know what the solution is, but it definitely seems more important to me than like something like fake news or gerrymandering or something.
Right.
It's just the simple fact that it's not super rational to go vote. Like, you know, it takes 15 minutes, half an hour out of your day. You wait in line and you have zero chance of making an impact. But we all, I mean, not all of us, but I vote every year, and I know lots of people vote every year, even though it's like objectively not rational. So I'm not sure really if there's a solution there, but to me, that seems like the big problem we should be talking about.
Right.
I have a question for the both of you, if I could chime in.
Please.
Yeah. So I was wondering, and I don't know, I just read this, and I don't know if it was from another post or if it was from somewhere in your post, but I lost it now. I was wondering what both of you think about whether voting should be made legally mandatory, so that, you know, if you don't vote, you have to pay some sort of civil fine. Do you think that is that something that you'd like to be considered, and do you think that it would solve a lot of the problems, both the representation problem and also sort of the pandering. And you had mentioned, the OP Assad had mentioned that you think that the Republicans in particular have got about taking up issues they think will win them votes. So if voting became mandatory for everyone, do you think that we would also see more honesty in politics?
I've actually thought about that issue a lot, and I think it's it would be a big improvement over what we have. And there are countries that do similar things, and it would be a big, but I mean, I think it has obvious downsides where you get a lot of noise. You get people who don't care that are just filling in the boxes, just to avoid a fine, and might not even bother to vote their preference, might just pick the first person or something. I don't really know the data on how often that happens. Personally, I would be for something like that, and I think the only downside to it is it might crowd out a better solution. Like there might be a better solution of, make Election Day a holiday, or I don't know if online voting would ever be technically possible, but I think there are good solutions out there. And my only downside to mandatory voting is that people would be like, okay, we fixed that problem, let's go on to the next. And it might not be it's better than what we have, but it's probably not the best solution.
I would also, that's just nuts to me that Election Day is not a holiday already. I just don't.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm going to enthusiastically agree as far as the holiday thing. But I would have to part ways as far as the mandatory voting. I feel like it's opposed to liberty in general to sort of make people have to do anything. I like government making people do things as least amount as possible. But I think there's a valid argument for it if it's, this elemental democratic thing of voting. Maybe that is an exception. I think reasonable people could definitely be on both sides of that. But what do you think, Saad?
I think it's an interesting conversation that we should definitely have. But I do have a few problems with it. As somebody under 18 that is forced to do a lot of things, I think being forced to do something makes people less enthusiastic about doing it, so that people that might have been enthused to do it before aren't now, because now they have to do it. It's a chore. Also, I think that part of your right to free speech in the First Amendment is the right to no speech at all. You have the right to make that decision, and I think people would have a big problem with that. But I also have to agree with all of you on the voting being a holiday. It should be as easy to vote as possible, but it's on a Tuesday, second Tuesday of November, because of, in the original, back when
that's
America
when
was created,
harvest is or something. Yeah,
it had something to do with like Christian holidays and stuff. I don't know, back in the day.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. As someone who is under 18, how do you feel about not being allowed to vote? Do you think you should be allowed to vote at a younger age?
That's a difficult question, because I think there are people my age that deserve to be able to vote, but I also think that there are people double my age that don't deserve to be able to vote. So it's a difficult question. Maybe we should have a conversation about it and see what they think, see what older people think, what younger people think, because obviously with everything that went on today, yesterday, younger people can have an impact in politics, and younger people can decide things for themselves and can be just as much leaders as adults can be. So
and we're making choices about what's ultimately going to be your future when we hand it off. So
yeah, that too.
We have an interest in any long-term decisions. But this is a fantastic West Wing episode where they debate this, but I won't go into it.
We should study this and see, do teenagers make responsible voting choices? And we just don't have that data. And it's the same kind of thing with, would a holiday for voting make more people turn out to vote? And it's probably, but we don't really know. Would it be a ton more? Would it be a little more? Would people, go to the beach instead, and then would you see less voting? It's kind of a similar thing you see with the restrictions on studying gun violence. There's it's not like we just have never thought of studying this stuff. It is the fact that the people who are in government actively don't want other options. If I got elected to Congress last year, I probably don't want younger people voting. I don't want to know that it'd be way better for the country if those people voted. Or if voting was on, a Saturday, would that be better for the country? Maybe, but it's probably not better for the people who just got elected, because they got elected
Or
under the
people who
current
work
system.
Saturdays.
What's that?
Or people who work on Saturdays.
Right. I mean, yeah. I mean, there's no perfect situation. Like, should we make Tuesday a holiday? Should we move it to Saturday? Like, we should do research and find out, like, what is a good system? Like, what would be better for everybody? But the people who have to make that decision are the people who just got elected under the past system, which they know how to do. Like, they're really good at getting turnout for their voters on Tuesday, and so it's just they don't have the incentive to change things.
Yeah, and I would add to that it's almost just one thing that I think hasn't been talked about is it's almost just sad how poor the voter turnout is. I mean, there's every child in the United States is taught in elementary school the whole, no taxation without representation, and that was one of the mottos that kicked off the American Revolution, and so they won our independence, obviously, and now we're in a situation where voter turnout is just horrible. I didn't know that Cal was from Scotland, and I had, after the independence referendum in 2012, I had researched and written a post about that, and Scotland was the sort of the model of voting that year. I mean, they had 84.5% of Scotland's voting eligible population turned out for that, which is incredible. I mean, you guys have said earlier that the biggest turnouts in the U.S. are always presidential elections. And in 2012, we only got 58.2% of the voting eligible population that showed up to vote. So if we wanted to get up to that 84% number, we would have needed nearly 83 million more Americans to show up. And so it's just sad to me that people are so apathetic about it, that something that was an issue that was important enough to basically the ideological drive behind starting the country in the first place. Now it's something that people just, my vote doesn't count, or the politicians are going to do whatever they want anyway. And it's just sad to me.
Well, this is going to be a half joke suggestion, but an 84% turnout for independence is a big deal. And obviously, when you have taxes without representation at all, that's a big deal. So it's like maybe every year we should put like one item on the ballot that's like, should we kick Montana out of this United States? Or, should we ban all dogs? And then everyone has to vote because it's a really important issue. And then, they'll vote for the president or the whatever as well at the same time. But you put something that everyone has to go out to vote for.
Pick a really important Supreme Court decision and put that on the ballot.
Right. Yeah,
we
exactly.
overturn this, and then everyone will show, you hope everyone will show up. Or then we end up with some really awful laws because people still don't show up.
If we ban all dogs, that's I'd get out for that.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It reminds me of something from the Nudge Unit where they what is that? It's the office in, I think, the UK, where they subtle, suggestive ways to move public policy or citizen behavior in a better direction, changing the organ donation from opt in to opt out. Little things like that. Putting dogs on the chopping block there. That's great.
No, I think I mean, at the end of the day, it kind of goes back to just where there's a huge voter apathy problem, and that you really, I don't know how you can institutionally make hundreds of millions of Americans care, because that seems very evasive to me.
Yeah. I think one of the solutions is to start young, which I think is what Senator Sanders did such a good job with. Well, even in the general election, few young people turned out to vote because nobody was excited about Hillary Clinton. In the primaries, more young people voted than in history. I don't know. A lot more. He got a lot more young people out to vote, which was a really good thing. And also, what Tristan said gave me a really good idea. What if we allowed people age 15 and up to vote, except their vote doesn't technically count? They're just allowed to do it, and then we can look at the data, basically.
That's a great idea. That would be great survey information. That would be great you'd know what's coming in the next 3 years.
Yeah.
Wow, I think that's pretty cool.
I think that would be it would almost be financially prohibitive though, because elections are so expensive, and then who's going to put forward the money to count millions of votes that don't actually count?
Yeah, well, yeah. Maybe that's like, Saad was saying, should we do an online voting? I still don't really see what any problem would be with a properly certified, blockchained up online voting thing of some kind. There's got to be some way to do that in a way that's transparent and verifiable.
I mean, we have social security numbers. They basically have all of our information about us for some reason, even though they weren't intended to be that way. But they basically have all of our information in, a simple.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can duplicate it.
8-digit number.
Maybe we vote on Facebook. Everyone's already on there,
Oh, yeah,
We're not
right.
leaving at any time soon. So let's just vote on
Speaking of Facebook, I was scrolling through this alignment chart, and there's one about social media, and Facebook is in, guess where, lawful evil.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, that seems about right.
Yeah. Right on. Well, that's a nice full circle, I think, back to the Facebook thing. And I wanted to get to just one or two other, we'd like to do one or two fun posts each week, and we're already over the hour mark here. So I just want to see if anyone has any final thoughts before we move to that last section.
No.
Yeah. All right. Well, so I just want to hear, there's a couple of really important posts that came up this week that we haven't talked about. And the first one I want to bring up is hits me somewhere close to the heart, particularly the stomach. And it goes as follows: change my view. Giant burgers that people cannot feasibly bite into are bad. I'll read the post. Burgers should have all their layers to be able to be bitten into at once. The burger should be constructed with complementary flavors, and its size should facilitate that. If a burger wanted people to have bits and pieces of its parts in every bite, why not just make it a salad instead? Salads are respectable, and they don't pretend that each bite is homogeneous. I love this post. It's also impractical. Big burgers look great on Instagram, and I agree that appearance is important, but big burgers are just hard to eat without portions flying out. It's wasted food, ! Posted by username ScratchedHead, 3,600 upvotes, and I like the flourish at the end with the exclamation point. Any thoughts on this post, people? I mean, I'm just going to add initially that for one reason, this is maybe not a great vote for change my view, is that there is no changing this view. This is an absolute of the universe. This OP is correct, and anyone who has major issues.
The silence is telling.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
There's a lot of good points that, especially the point about all the flavors should be enjoyed at the same time. I think that's very true.
Right?
So, yeah.
Well, I think the big problem is that what we think looks good to eat and what is actually good to eat don't overlap a lot of the time. Like Starbucks sold that unicorn frappuccino or whatever, and that thing's a disaster, but people loved it because it looks amazing.
I
I
wouldn't
thought
have ordered
did
it
not look
simply
amazing.
because I don't wish hell upon the baristas.
Yeah.
That's a moral position right there. That's I am going to read the top voted comment here, 661 upvoted points rather. This is by Polychrist or Christ. And they say, I would like to argue that giant burgers are not in and of themselves bad, but rather are only bad because they are difficult to eat and provide no obvious means of doing so. While salads have their place, you don't expect every bite to have every component of a salad in it. Though they should, I think. And so burgers are differentiated because they have flavors, which I agree with you, ought to be complementary and taken together. But the solution is not the burger. The solution is better utensil usage. I think that large burgers should be wide enough that they can be sliced without all the condiments falling out. And perhaps even like, I guess a half slice, perhaps even it could become pre-quartered. The appropriate utensil is a skewer with which you can stab the meat pile and insert lengthwise into your food hole. TLDR, giant burgers aren't useless. But they should be skewerable. And then a brief reply by OP, who gives a delta here. That's compelling, like a kebab. Delta.
I literally thought kebab before I read that.
I was thinking that too, yeah.
Yeah. And even so, a chef who makes a burger without that, isn't that a bad burger? It's sort of like a really good noodles served with a spoon. It's a chef. If a chef makes really good noodles knowing there's only a spoon, is that a good chef? But I mean, what are they thinking you're going to do? Like you would have to squish it. to eat it. Like, what are they really actually thinking? They're a chef. They're a food expert. And any layperson could look at that and be like, there's no way my mouth's getting around that. Like, what's the plan?
Yeah, if it's actually so big that you can't squish it down and can't, like, you see the pictures of some of these burgers that, at least in the photos, look like they're nearly 6 inches tall. And it's just not going to happen. And so,
Yeah.
to me, that's putting all of the focus on presentation. And I think at that point you're at the, well, what's your philosophy of food? Like, how important is presentation versus the practical matter of eating it the way a burger is supposed to be eaten?
Okay, I've got another take on this.
All right.
Well, with the only real way to eat those burgers, you can't eat it straight on. You have to go at an angle. You start at the top corner or the bottom corner and work your way down or work your way up.
Wait,
Maybe
what
that
burger?
is the chef's intention, is to force you to start with like a little meat on the bottom, then switch it up and go for like a little whatever's on the top, onion rings and salad or whatever. Maybe the intention isn't to get a
Two
bite of everything
burgers.
at once, but to get two different meals or two different perspectives on the same meal.
Civilization is collapsing. No. They should at least come with a press, that you can just crush it down like a pancake or something.
Have you heard about those people that eat burgers upside down so that the topping hits their tongue first rather than the other way around?
Well, see, okay, now that's just built into the system. Like, okay, because if you don't want to flip the buns, just flip the inside parts, right, at the bun.
Well, didn't Google just get into trouble for their emoji was built backwards?
Oh,
It was the order of the
Yeah, like
Yeah.
You can't build your burger backwards, otherwise it'll just be like social unrest.
Yeah.
these are the same people who put the toilet paper roll in the
See,
wrong.
I think that what we've realized is that these are the sorts of issues that need to go on the ballot every election.
Yes.
Yes, to
Yeah.
get people out to vote.
Yeah, because people, is the dress blue or black or whatever the hell, and then people will go vote.
That was one of the greatest ever, that dress.
Yeah, no.
It takes me back to the Rebecca Black days.
Yeah.
But it's a Sunday, so I won't mention her. All right. Any other thoughts on this burger debacle? This
I think we've
pile of
given it more
controversy.
than enough airtime.
I think you just vote with your wallet. If you see the burgers are too big to eat, you don't buy them.
Yeah. And there was one other post, I think. Was there another one, Cal, that we were going to bring up that was a fun one?
I just remember it. I didn't actually have it in front of me. Something about temperature of coffee.
Oh, yes. They're saying if you order coffee, it should come at a temperature you can drink it right away.
I remember this.
Yeah. Now, there was a U.S. case in the 90s that served as sort of a people were pointed to it as an example of ridiculous over litigation, bad lawsuits, bad suing, bad examples of what suing is for, as a woman who spilled her coffee and got some millions of dollars from McDonald's. On looking at the case again, this many years later, in fact, it wasn't ridiculous, and she had gotten like severe burns and damage, and like it turned out to be legit. So, as someone who is a huge wimp when it comes to temperature, like I can't drink that coffee for a half hour. Like, I like this idea, but then like I know people who could drink that right away. I mean, is this just allowing for the highest temperature enjoyers to not get excluded from the opportunity of their ideal coffee experience? Is this the most inclusive answer, is to have it a high temperature so it includes everyone? You just have to wait a little longer, or should we go for the average of ideal temperature?
I think that there's an inherently flawed premise that the temperature at which coffee is drinkable is the same for everyone, and I think that is not true at all.
Yeah.
So I don't even know practically how you would do that, because if you lower it to the OP's ideal temperature, then you're going to have a bunch of people who think that their coffee is too cool when they get it at the window.
How about we just give them more options? You can have a hot coffee, medium coffee, low coffee.
I was actually going to comment on this post, but I didn't want to reveal myself as a huge coffee snob. And the thing about really hot coffee is you actually taste the coffee less. Like, the heat overwhelms your tastiness. So hot coffee is a great way to cover up bad coffee. And as coffee cools, if it's good coffee, it'll start to taste better, actually, as you can taste it. Like, around body temperature is about the best temperature to taste coffee.
That's why I hate Starbucks so much.
It comes really hot because it's really bad. And then if you get really good coffee, they'll often serve it at a cooler temperatures. And then people who are really into like good coffee will let it cool for like half an hour, and drink it at like body temperature or room temperature. So I think that the really hot coffee isn't so much about like making people happy with whatever temperature. It's about covering up bad coffee.
Wow, that's a cool new perspective. I hadn't thought of that. That's like almost Delta worthy. I not thought of that at all. That's but I think it's right. And I do enjoy like that room temperature coffee if it's good. Now that I think about it, you know, it never occurred to me before. That's
It's the opposite with beer as well. I mean, there's a reason people, you know, your shitty beer like Coors Light and things, those are served absolutely ice cold.
Tap the Rockies. Look how cold we are.
And yeah, exactly. And then nicer beers are
temperature
typically
is
better
our
enjoyed.
flavor. Yeah. Assad, just while you're here, I'm curious. Do you drink coffee?
Yes, every morning. And I literally I get the coffee at like 8:30. I drive to class. It's not done till like 10.
Not ready to drink? Oh, you're just sipping on it for a while.
Well, I mean, I do wait a while. You know, I'm like you. I wait like half an hour until I can drink my coffee.
Yeah. Like a little moment of quiet.
I'm more of a tea man.
We didn't think of it from tea perspective. You see, it's so America-centric here. I just didn't think to pull in the tea part.
Yeah, tea is just the best.
All right. Does anyone else have thoughts on the coffee, the tea, the Facebook, the hamburgers, anything at all before we wrap it up? 'Cause I gotta go start my shift in 7 minutes.
No, thanks for hosting this and for having this.
Yeah, this was really great. Before we totally sign off, would you each just say, hey, this is so and so. This was my post, just so we can kind of one more time identify you with that for those listening. Let's go in order.
Yeah, do you want the title again? Oh, I don't have it in front of me anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, my name's Quentin, and I posted, I think 5 days ago about basically calling for people to delete their Facebook profiles as a moral imperative.
Great. And Saad?
Yeah, I'm Saad. I posted, I think, last Tuesday on the voter trends of how and why people vote based on their political party and allegiance.
Right on. And Tristan?
This is PM Me Your Definitions, and I commented on Saad's post talking about voter turnout.
Fantastic. Well, this has been really great having all three of you on, and we've let this episode breathe a little longer than the normal ones, which I think we've having all three has been great. And I think we're going to go ahead and just sign off. So, Cal, anything else to add?
Nope. Thank you, everybody. Thanks.
All right. See the show notes for more details. Thank you for listening to Change My View podcast, March 25th, 2018, episode 18. Goodbye.